I'm Gene Grant here in the studios of New Mexico PBS with our Line Opinion panelists. Now, not all of our topics on our minds each week make it onto the show. We often read stories that we want to talk about, but we just don't have enough time to cover it. Or it may be something that just came up that you just can't let lie. We'd love to take a quick turn around the table and ask each of these panelists what that one more news story that stuck with you this week. Andy, I'll start with you. You cover so many things. I'm imagining there's a lot of things that stick with you. But is there one that's jumped out recently for you?
I'll plug one of my own stories, actually. Please. Is that just this week, it was the final sign-off on a settlement between the city and children of this gentleman, Mickey Owings, who was shot and killed by APD in 2010. And it was actually one of the big mentions in the DOJ report. This was a carryover from the previous administration, and it's kind of like closing things up, and it's one of the last few remaining bits of the use of force that DOJ found. Yeah.
Is there something about that particular case that speaks to the use of force policy in its old incarnation? Is there something about it that jumps out to you?
The lawyer, Joe Kennedy, who represented the children of this man, mentioned to me that yes, it showed use of force, but also that they weren't prepared. They were trying to do a stolen car sting operation, and they just didn't have the right people in place. They didn't have the right procedures, and things got out of hand. And,
oh boy.
Yeah.
It's a tough business when you have to learn. It's always the hard way. It's difficult. Merritt, what's been jumping out for you out there?
Absolutely. The bright spot in my week was Dan McKay's piece on yesterday's meeting of the Revenue Stabilization and Tax Policy Committee in the legislature, where there's a glimmer of hope for tax reform. And in our awful partisan environment, I mean, in our lifetimes, we've never seen a more toxic political environment. That's the one thing people got behind federally, tax reform. Okay, let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. Right. For New Mexico to do the same and maybe get us out of the bottom of some of these rankings for business and economy, I'm really buoyed at the prospect of it.
Love it. We're going to watch that one close. That could be very interesting at some point, too. The previously mentioned Dan McKay, what's been jumping out there for you? What's been, again, you cover so many different things. Which ones made it to the top of the pile for you?
Well, the Revenue Stabilization Committee is really interesting, but I won't touch on that now. You can't go wrong with something with revenue stabilization in the title and tax policy.
Not in our state.
I've been thinking a little bit about crime from a broader perspective. The legislative analysts took a broad look at crime patterns in Bernalillo County and Albuquerque, and they mentioned a lot of things that we don't typically write about as reporters when it comes to crime. They looked at links between poverty, increases in the share of families in poverty and crime in certain census tracts, and it really was a reminder to me that that crime patterns are much more complicated than policymakers often talk about. It's not something that's easy to fix through even necessarily police department policies, but there are these larger economic factors and social conditions that are important to consider too. And there really isn't necessarily an easy answer.
And it's good that those things are getting on the table, however, in that discussion, those other factors. It's not just about, statistics and who's doing what, where, what part of town. There's all kinds of other things. I appreciate that, too, because that's another one we're going to have to watch closely as we kind of wind our way through crime here in our city. Vicki Harrison, what's been jumping out there for you of the many things that you look at over the course of a news cycle?
Well, and probably not surprising, coming from Common Cause, I really enjoyed the Searchlight report this last week, where Searchlight New Mexico looked at state contracts and where they go and how much they are. We were talking earlier that it's not that so many go out of state, which is a huge part of it, but it's also that so much is outsourced.
Gotcha.
I don't think people understand how much is outsourced. We'll hear about the governor has this attorney on retainer or whatever, and we're just horrified when we see these possible numbers. But when you amplify that across all departments, it just, when I hear people saying that the schools need transparency and accountability where their money's going, so does everybody else. That's right. That's a lot of money going out in contracts. And as somebody who has contractors, you pay them more than you pay employees.
That's right. That's right. At the end of the day. That's a good one right there, too. Interesting. Back when Mayor Berry was running for his second office, right here in the studio, we did the mayoral forum here I hosted. And I put that question to him about, city contracts. Why can't we just bring some more home, keep them here? It gives people chances to pump up their, companies and such. it was just not an answer. So it's really good that we're getting some traction on this now. Citywide, Tim Keller's talking about this with statewide as well. So anyway, thank you all very much. Good stuff. I appreciate that. We'll do this again.